the repetitive nature of Anki just brings the answer to your mind before you can even consciously walk through the answer yourself.
We went to school today and we had 4 lectures, and so we have 4 new materials to read, and we did that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Can you walk us through how you'll be able to read all that, create Anki for all that, and be able to catch up?
Because I think the setting that came on the Anki app, the easy interval was about 4 days, and I realized that wasn't working for me because in 4 days and so I had to go and reset the interval.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you are doing well. 400 level has been a lot, and that's why I've not really been able to record video for a while. If you are new on my channel, I'm Olusola Adebayo and I'm a 500 level medical student. The last time I was on this channel, I was a 400 level medical student, but now levels have changed. Today on my channel, we'll be talking about an active recall study app that is very popular, but I've discovered that most of us don't really know how to use it well, and so because of that, I've brought, she said she's not an expert, but I've brought someone that I believe that can really help us in, like, I've seen her use it and I've seen it work for her, and I believe she'll be in the best position to talk to us about it. So I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Bullet Federala and I'm also a 500 level medical student.
Okay, so we'll move into the video now. So Ankidroid is an app quite popular, I believe. So it's an app that helps for active recall while studying. So this app, I've tried to use it, I can't remember as far back, but maybe 100 level or 200, I'm not sure. I've tried to use it, putting some questions there, but somehow I won't get around using it well. Either I don't go back to look at it well, or I'm not diligent in trying to do the flashcards. Even in my 300 level, I actually really tried. I was determined that okay, this time around I'm going to use this app, because I watched YouTube videos. There are different ways by which you can study. Active recall is one of the most proven effective way of studying, whereby you can actually recall what you study better. So Ankidroid is an app that helps you that. So because of that, I really wanted to try it, and I tried for a while. Like, should I say a month, 2 months? I'm not really sure. And it really worked then. It really worked, but along the way I just fell off the rail too. So, and I want to believe that there are a lot of us like me on the other side of the screen that we've tried using Ankidroid, but somehow either we don't understand how the app works, or we cannot just be consistent with it, or we don't just know how to plan our time. Should I say plan? Because sometimes it can be actually time consuming. That is one thing I noticed, that sometimes when I'm using Ankidroid, like I'm trying to solve questions, let's say 40 questions, 50 questions, 60 questions, and I'm spending hours on it. It's actually useful, but because of how time consuming it is, it may discourage us. So any issues you have with it, I want to believe that she will help us with that. So now I'll be starting with asking some general questions. Firstly is, what is Ankidroid and how does it work?
Okay, so Ankidroid is an app that helps with active recall, like Shola said. So essentially, you either set questions or you get pre-made decks that people have made. You import it into the app and then you use it to study. You click on the app, you do the questions, and depending on how hard you find the questions, it gives you like a spectrum of about 4 answers, from I think very easy to very hard. And so that is what is going to help it, the interval between now when you're doing it and the next time is going to bring the question to you. But again, all of that is also very dependent on the settings, to the amount of days you put in the app to bring new questions or old questions to you. So essentially, it's an app that is used for active recall while you're studying.
Please, how do I get started with Ankidroid?
The first thing you do is to download the app from the Play Store. But I use an Android phone, and so the Play Store has Ankidroid. But if you use an Apple phone or an Apple device, the version of Anki on the Apple Store is a bit different from the Android one. And so the joy of Anki really is how, like, sharing decks with your friends and your friend sharing decks with you. If your friend is using an Apple phone, it's going to be a bit difficult, the sharing and the receiving of decks. They can't use your decks and you can't use their decks. At least so far, that's what I found out, and I've not found a way around that yet. So it's, my experience is solely based on the Android version of the Anki app.
Apart from the sharing of decks, the way the app works is the same with Android and Apple.
I wouldn't know because I've not used
Okay,
it
you've
on
not
the
tried
Apple device.
If you're using Apple phone, please don't be discouraged by this. I think you will still really benefit from this video, and you can just go check later and compare with the things she's going to say if it's actually the same. So what are the benefits of using Ankidroid?
So the benefits of Anki are going to differ from person to person, and it's going to depend on your study process and how well you can merge your study process and reviewing Anki cards together. For me, I have a very bad memory, and so Anki works very well to help me stay on track with the voluminous amount of materials that I have to go through. But I've found lots of people that Anki doesn't work well for, and I don't think there's any point in forcing it. But if you've noticed that it works for you, then it really does help with active recall, because even sometimes when you can't remember exactly where you have seen the answer, maybe like you have a question and you can't remember exactly where or even how the answer fits into the context of the question, the repetitive nature of Anki just brings the answer to your mind before you can even consciously like walk through the answer yourself. So the benefits are going to differ from person to person. It's going to differ on the type of brain you have, the type of method of studying that just generally works best for you.
Like, does it help you manage your time? Like, reduces the time that you have to spend studying some certain material?
I think generally you first have to look at the options, the studying options you have. I don't have that many studying options because again my memory is not a very good one, and so it was either Anki worked for me or Anki did not work. It had to work for me. So whether it increased or reduced my studying time, it's like the only way I can effectively study. And so if it increases my study time, that just means I have to allot more time to study. For me, actually, before I started using the app, this was about like 200 level. It was after the COVID break, and everybody was in a rush to find like, oh my god, how am I going to study? They said 200 level is hard. What's the best something? And I did not know what I was doing. But like, because like a lot of study resources were going on around, use this, use that, use this textbook, use this textbook, and then somebody just mentioned the Anki app to me and I downloaded it. And before then, I remember like I had tried studying and like I was just so confused and overwhelmed. And one of the things I realized while I was trying to study at the time was writing down questions from the topic that I had studied, and then like going over the jotter that I had written those questions in, and then trying to answer those questions.
Yeah, I've tried that.
And so when the option of Anki was presented to me, it just felt like an automated way of doing something I was already considering to do for my studying. And so I remember like downloading the app. Working through the app, it wasn't very difficult for me. I kind of learned the tricks, I guess, of the app as time went on. But at the time, it was my only study option. It was the only tool I had in my arsenal like to study. And so when you download the app and you know you install it and all, there's this little plus button, and it brings you the option of either creating a card or creating a deck. And so you create a deck, so you can title that deck, say, biochemistry, and then you long click on that deck to create a sub deck, maybe for the topic you want to make flashcards on. And then when you do that, you title the name of the sub deck. You can create as many subjects of subjects of subjects as you can, as long as it helps you to organize your study material.
Okay, so a deck is like a section. A deck can contain different groups of flashcards for different topics.
Yes.
Okay, so a deck, this is a biochemistry deck. Different topics on that biochemistry, you create different flashcards.
Yes. Okay. And then when I finished my first in course and I needed to study for my second in course, I just renamed my biochemistry deck biochemistry. Then you subdeck it first in course, so that like it kept my first in course topics under my first in course deck. That way I did not have to interfere with the new set of topics I was preparing for my second in course. And when I finished 200 level, I had to subdeck all of that under 200 level to create a new subdeck of 300 level.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was how my study method went.
So after you get the app and you go about setting questions, the questions you type them yourself, right? The app does not create them automatically for you. Like, as you read, you write in the questions, or you read first, then you go back to set the questions.
It depends on how lazy I'm feeling in the moment, I guess. When I'm in my bag, when I'm serious, I give the material a period, or the textbook, however my work, I give it a period to just have an idea of the terms, the terminologies, what to expect from the topic. I give it a period so that I will know what questions to even set for myself. So that's why I usually give it a period. But on days when I'm feeling lazy and I just know that I might not be able to have time to set these questions again, I just go into the material straight and set questions first. And then when I'm studying like the material afresh, I then edit the cards or make adjustments to it as time goes on. But again, it really depends on how lazy I'm feeling in the moment.
Do you read the material once and any other reading you do is on the Ankidroid?
It depends on the complexity of the material. Okay, so most times, let's assume my bag, yeah. So I give the material a period, then after I've read it once, I set my Anki questions. And then I don't read the material again until the next day. And that next day, it is me revising with the Anki questions just to know how much my brain absorbed the very first time I read the material and the first time I set the questions. So from there, it kind of gives me an idea of how many more times I might need to read the material or how many more times I might need to review my Anki cards. And so if the first time I review with my Anki cards, if it's very bad, if my scores are nothing to write home about, I have to go back to reread the material. And then in cases like that, when I reread the material, I then review the Anki questions immediately after. My brain does better with questions after reading, and so once I review the material again, I then review my Anki questions again just to have a firmer grip on the knowledge that the material has to offer.
Okay, let's use the typical medical school or general school. We went to school today and we had 4 lectures, and so we have 4 new materials to read, and we did that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Can you walk us through how you'll be able to read all that, create Ankidroid for all that, and be able to catch up? One of the issues for me was that they become too overwhelming. The Ankidroid I already set for myself, I'm still trying to get that, but another material is now being released by the lecturer, and so I'm constantly trying to play catch up.
In med school, I don't know if you ever stop playing catch up with Anki cards. I mean, there's a never-ending joke on TikTok on how med students are always doing their Anki cards because there's always so much to get through. The trick, I guess, is starting early. I find like the biggest hurdle is creating the cards, which is why even when I'm feeling lazy, before I've read the material at all, I just try to create the cards. That way I know that, because creating the cards takes a lot of time, and once that's out of the way, I know I can just focus on studying the material and reviewing the cards. As to playing catch up, as more materials drop and as you create more cards, that means you have more and more cards to review as the days go by. I don't review everything. I find that after like I've reviewed a topic with the spaced repetition feature, after I've reviewed a topic about 4 or 5 times, I have a firm grasp on it such that like I can go a couple of weeks without needing to review that topic again. And so the best thing about Anki is the spaced repetition and the magic of spaced repetition itself, the magic it affords you, in the sense that like after you have reviewed a topic about 4 or 5 times, all depends on the individual, but after you reviewed it like for a while, you can go a long while without having to review it, trusting that you've retained about 70% of the knowledge in that material, and any other brush up you need to do will not take you a third of the time that it took you initially. And so I think that's just the trick of it. And then again, materials define the bulk of knowledge that they're expecting you to have, or the intricacies of knowledge that they expect. There are some materials that you read and you know they're not expecting the final details out of this, and there are some that you read and you know the details are the key. So it depends on the bulk of the material, and then once you work well with the spaced repetition feature and you do it 4 or 5 times, you should be good to go for a while.
Okay, so after you do it for about 4 or 5 times, you focus on the new materials coming on, leave down for a while, then maybe when the school says exam or so, you just review it again. Okay, so this is like a lot of work.
It is a lot of
4 or 5 times, like that for 5 times that you do spaced repetition, is it within like a week, 1 month?
No. Okay, so let's say I get the material today and I make the flashcards today. I will review the flashcards. I have to review it tomorrow. In fact, if I plan on remembering anything in the material, I have to review those flashcards the next day. So when I review those flashcards the next day, depending on the setting on the Anki app, I think the setting that came on the Anki app, the easy interval was about 4 days, and I realized that wasn't working for me because in 4 days, and so I had to go and reset the interval on the Anki app to, I think my easy interval became 1 day instead. And so if I make the flashcards today and I review it tomorrow, the day after that I have to review it. The next time I'll review it will be in like 3, maybe 4 days, and then So all my like 4 or 5 times like of reviewing my flashcards are not usually within a week, maybe like a month, maybe 3 weeks.
Okay.
So the key is spaced repetition, that there is time for your brain to move on to other things, to learn new things, and then you try to recall what you had learned initially. So if you cluster your reviewing too closely together, you find that you eventually forget, because then there is no real test of long-term memory on your brain. So the point of Anki is to help you build long-term memory. So you have to space it in a way that it does help your long-term memory and not just reinforce your short-term memory.
Do you have like a timetable for you to know what topics you have to review today? Because how do you know forget that, okay, you have to review this topic today or next tomorrow?
There's no magic to it. You forget that you need to review topics. There is no, you are definitely going to forget. Okay. The volume of coursework, especially in 400 level, was so much that it was impossible to keep up with. It was so impossible to keep up with. So I feel like it's good to not put your hopes too high. You will forget to review cards. You can't escape that. You will invariably forget to review cards. But another thing that keeps my sense of urgency up is, I guess, past questions. And I'm doing past questions, and I realize that my knowledge on the topic is nothing to write home about. It's very urgent something. Urgent prick to like, oh, Bolu, you have to go and review your flashcards. Exactly.
So do you have like a range of number of questions you ask per material, or it depends on the volume of the material, how bulky it is?
It depends on how bulky it is. I've sent 300 questions from one single material before.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, so it depends on how bulky the material is. So.
Okay. Then about sharing decks with friends, can you speak more on that?
I think the disadvantage I have when it comes to Anki is that I can't use other people's decks, and I found that the process of creating the flashcards like itself is a very important process in studying, because it's not an automated or another person creating it for you. You are actually interacting with the material. You are seeing your material and you are bringing questions out from it. So that process for me is very important. And so I learned very early in the game that I can't use other people's decks. But I've had people come up to me to ask for my decks, and I always wonder how they work with my decks, but if it works, who am I to question other people's study methods? So when people ask for my decks, I usually export the deck and then forward it to them, and then they import it and they use the deck.
I think people that use it, maybe they've read the materials and they just want to, instead of solving past questions, just like a real
test of the material.
Yes, just to test it. But I think that point you mentioned is very important. It's just like you are going through the material too.
Yes.
Maybe not as optimally as you would, but you are still actually interacting with it. And on days where you get tired of it, get overwhelmed by the number of flashcards you have to go through, because that's something that discourages me sometimes.
Yes.
When I tried using it, let's say I allot 3 hours to study a particular course, but I'm like, okay, before I study this new course, let me go through the flashcard I created yesterday or the first day. I'll say I already spent like 2 hours on doing that, and I have little time to. How do you keep up with managing your time in studying newer decks and older decks, and also how do you stay consistent regardless of the overwhelming amount of flashcards you have to use sometimes?
Okay. So that was something I experienced a lot in 400 level. The fact that I was spending a lot of time reviewing old flashcards and not enough time studying new material. When that happened, in extenuating circumstances, that just means like I won't review old flashcards. It just means I'm going to study the newer material instead. I found that a lot of times when I planned on reviewing flashcards, I always underestimated the amount of time it took me to get through the flashcards. And so that was something I had to adjust in my study process, to actually like, Bolu, these flashcards you want to start, it's going to take you like 2-3 hours to get through like all your good cards. And so I had to make peace with that and to come to the reality of the amount of time it did take me to get through flashcards. But in extenuating circumstances, when I could not afford the time to review those flashcards, I guess you have to play, one has to go. And so the flashcards sometimes had to go, and I had to use that time to study new material instead. And sometimes when I realized that I did not have enough time to create cards and then study new material and then review old cards, what I just did was study the new materials, because you can create cards mindlessly. I guess you could be waiting in line and be creating cards from your phone, from the materials on your phone. You could be eating and be creating flashcards. And so I realized that I could allot the time, the precious time I was using to create flashcards, into other activities where I did not need as much brain power. So say eating, or just waiting for your posting instructor to come, or just that time of the day when you are very, very tired and you are tempted to like go through your phone. I realized that I could create flashcards tired, but I couldn't study tired. So all my tired time, I guess, that I usually just used mindlessly, like scrolling through the internet, I sacrifice my mindless scrolling time to creating flashcards instead.
Okay, I think that will work. Do you think that in this 400 level class you just completed without bulky it was enough? Did you successfully create flashcards for all the materials that we had?
Yes, about 99% of them I did create flashcards for. I didn't intend to create flashcards for everything, but as time went on and I realized that I had to find a way to keep up with knowledge that I was reading but I wasn't reviewing. There were lots of materials that I hurriedly created flashcards for. Like I didn't intend on creating flashcards for it when I started, but then as time went on I had to create flashcards for, so that I'd be able to at least study while like in transit, or so that I could make use of time when I wasn't actively studying to at least review the materials. It didn't matter whether I got the questions right or did not get the questions right, as long as Anki told me what the correct answer eventually was. And you never know when knowledge like that just helps you, like in extenuating circumstances. There's something I think a lot of people struggle with, and it's the settings on Anki. When you start using Anki, the default setting of the app is that you can only review 20 cards per day, and so you have to change that setting. So you turn it to the largest possible. It depends on how many cards you actually want to go through per day. I did not want a limit on the amount of cards I could go through per day, so I changed the setting to I think 9999, just to some arbitrary number, so that I could get through as many cards as I wanted to in a day without any restriction. Then I also had to change my interval, the space between my repetition, I guess. For when I started using the app, I think it was set to maybe 2 or 4 days. I had to change my easy interval to 1 day. When you've gone through like your reviews, when you've reviewed your apps, it takes a couple of days or hours, depending on what level you are, before the app brings those questions back to you. So I had to adjust the setting for the number of days that it would take before I got back the old questions I'd reviewed. Then I also used custom study a lot, because I think that's also something like a lot of people did not know about. Even if you don't have any cards to study at the moment, maybe because you just studied them yesterday and the next time the app is going to bring you the questions like maybe in like 3 days, you can always just custom study the app. Just long press on the deck, it brings you custom study, then it brings you what type of custom study you want. Do you want to study ahead, in the sense that like if the app is going to bring you the question in the next 2 days, do you want to study those questions from the next 2 days ahead of time, in which you input the amount of days ahead you want to study? If you just want to study randomly, which is what I do most times, and it brings you the option of inputting the amount of questions you want to study randomly. And so that's what I do. So I just long press on the deck, click on custom study, ask me how many questions you want to study. I just put an arbitrary number, 200, so that I can study the deck again whenever I want without the restriction of spaced repetition, I guess. Because again, there are some materials you have to review more often than others, and the app, it's an app, it doesn't understand the nuances, I guess, of studying. So sometimes you do have to custom study like a lot to get ahead of.
Like you used Ankidroid to study a particular course and you go for the exam. Does it help you very well in solving the real life questions that we have to get?
The answer to this is going to depend on what your goal was from the get-go with the app Ankidroid. When I set out to use Ankidroid, it wasn't particularly to be able to answer questions in MCQ. It was more of to build a broad knowledge base, such that like if I had real life questions, at least I would have the knowledge base to kind of sort through to get my answers from. And so my goal using Ankidroid was to ensure that I knew the material very intimately, like about 95% of the material I could tell you about. Not that like I'd see a question and I'd be wondering, oh, did they teach us this or did they not teach us this? My goal was to know on seeing a question whether this was even in the material at all or if it wasn't. And so it was to create a very solid knowledge base on the material I had been given or on the material I was studying. And so when I saw questions, very rarely when our MCQ questions a direct reflection of my Anki questions, very rarely, but at least it did provide me the knowledge base to be able to answer the questions. And so I was able to like, just go back into my knowledge base. Okay, because like a lot of times I found that like when talking with people and they like they'd ask me questions or something on the material, I was able to tell you where in the material this was from, and that was because I had reviewed my materials and the questions like over and over again. I like to prefer the worst case scenario, in the sense that like if the lecturer decides that they don't want to repeat past questions and they want to ask me questions directly from the material, if that were ever to happen, would I be able to answer convincingly? So it was just to have like a very solid base, a very solid grasp on my study materials, and that way it would help me answer the questions. When I set my questions, I usually make the answers exactly what the material said. So that way, like sometimes even when I'm like reviewing questions, I don't wait to read the entire answer. I just like need a few keywords from the answer just to make sure that like what I know in my head is what my material said. But like I like to put in the exact material answers so that like in cases where I don't have direct access to my material, I can at least read it in like the lecturer's own words, like, oh, he said this and this and this and this about the topic. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when I'm studying the cards I read through like all the answers every time. No, I don't do that. It's only when like I don't remember the answer or when I put in the answer wrong, then I then look like, oh, what did I get wrong and how did I get it wrong?
And that way it can also help you in answering theory questions too. Because I was concerned about that too.
Yes.
Okay, it's concerned.
That was one of the ways like Anki really helped me in my preclinical years, especially as MB drew closer and theory questions were now a concern. In the sense that like the answers I trained myself with were answers like from the material, they were definitions, they were listing the factors that related to something. So they were not just geared towards multiple choice, they were geared towards the entire like the material.
Did you ever think you're focusing on asking the wrong questions, in that when you went back to check let's say past questions, you saw that what they were asking were different from what you focused on in the questions you put in the app, and what did you do in that case?
Yes, it happened to me a few times, but the times that it did happen, I found that they were as a result of me not making the best of the questions I had already set. Because again, when I set questions, it covers the entire span of the material, and so that means like when it happened, I noticed that it was because there were some questions when I was reviewing the questions that I did not think were important enough to be tested on, I guess. And so like I'd get to past questions and just realize, oh, this thing is important though. And so I'd have to eventually go back to my material to just give it like a cursory read one more time, and then if I find that I haven't set questions on those particular aspects, I add those questions to my deck, to the cards I've already created, and I then restudy or review the deck afresh. But a lot of times the times that it did happen to me, I found were not as a result of the questions that I initially set, but more as a result of my habits when I was reviewing the questions. There were some questions that sometimes unconsciously you just don't think are important, like who asked me this one, and then you enter past questions and then you realize that this actually this is like, important stuff,
like actual history or like
exactly. But because like from the get-go, like even back, I remember like there was this material like in I think 300 level, the cancer material, the history, the first like couple of pages of history. I'd already set questions on those before I even started reading the material, and so as I was reviewing my cards, it did not feel like any extra effort. It was just part of like my normal routine. And so when I saw some of those questions in past questions on history, it did not feel like a shock to me, because I'd already, again, I was reviewing the material as a whole entity. I wasn't focusing on certain parts that I felt were more important. I just set questions from the beginning of the material until the very end, and I just reviewed.
For every material, apart from reviewing on the Ankidroid flashcard app, how many times do you study the material itself?
I have to go through the material about 3 times. 4 times apart from my reviewing. At least peruse the material from beginning to the end about 3-4 times, depending on how bulky the material is, how bulky my workload.
So what's your study time like? During your study time, is that when you review cards, or that's when you study materials, and when do you review cards?
Okay, so my study time, I try my best to make my study time solely for actually studying the material or studying new material, or reviewing old material. With my reviewing cards, I usually do it in between my day, in between chores, in between postings, in between classes. Just anywhere that I have pockets of time, that's what I use to review my cards. While my studying time is usually for reviewing my old material. If I don't have a very firm grasp on the material yet, then I review the material in my study time and then read new material in my study time. Or attention span isn't very good, I sometimes review cards in between studying. Say like I do 30 minutes of studying, then I do 15 minutes of cards reviewing, now another 30 minutes of studying, that kind of thing.
So that means you actually still have a study time whereby you actually still study the materials. You don't just rely solely on the Anki cards that, okay, I said the question I already once, and next your remaining interactions with the topic is just through the Ankidroid app. No, that's not what happens.
No.
You actually still go back to study the materials normally.
If I find that I'm not very confident or my knowledge is patchy, flashcards can't exactly help fix that. They just give you the answers to things. But the only advice I have for people when it comes to studying is to know yourself. So if you've tried Anki and it hasn't worked for you, chances are it probably is still not going to work for you.
Okay.
And you're better off using that extra time doing something that actually does work for you. So at the end of the day, it's just to know what works best for you and sticking with it.
Thank you so much for coming on my channel. I'm really grateful you are here. This will be all for today. If you have any other question that you want to ask, maybe you still have some questions that we've not answered, you can just put them in the comment section. Maybe you are someone there too that you also use Ankidroid very well and you have some additional tips that you want to drop, you can also leave that in the comment section. Shout out to you for watching this video. Shout out to Bolu for coming on my channel to educate us on this topic. Shout out to my supporting crew, Yetunde, my roommate. You will see her in one of my videos. Shout out to Ife too for asking us questions. Thank you so much everyone for watching. I hope you stay tuned for my next video. I love you, but Jesus loves you more. Bye.
Bye.